Welcome to our November session of Fireside Chat course on Basic Buddhism. I'm Anita Kazarian of the Cleveland Buddhist Temple, one of the 5 volunteers in our steering committee who help bring these sessions to you. I'll be serving as your MC this evening. For this month's session, we'll be covering pages 34 to 51 from the Jewels book as we continue our Fireside Chat sessions on Introduction to Basic Buddhism for the West and beyond. A short questionnaire has already been sent to you in the last email. After our fireside chat is over today, please consider responding to the questions. Also in the Buddhist spirit of interdependence, we ask that you please keep your video screen on during the session while you're sitting at your monitor, because seeing one another will put this Buddhist spirit of interdependence into practice. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our instructor and moderator, Dr. Tanaka. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Hello, everyone. This is our third session in a course of 10 sessions. So I hope you're all doing well. And let me get started by sharing my screen. Okay, again, it is important that you do the readings in our textbook. It's very easy reading. And today, the topic is on Life of the Buddha, which most of you know pretty well. So I will not be going into the details, some of the things that I think you already know, but it will be kind of a review for some of you. Today, we have 2 guests. One, the late speaker is Mr. Tatsuaki Kono from Japan. And then we have a minister, Reverend Matt Hamasaki from Sacramento Buddhist Church in Sacramento, California. So we're looking at the Buddha, and I try to summarize what I think are the points that I think are important in the 3 main points. And the 3 main points are: first, the Buddha was a human being and not a god or a divine being. And second was that he was most concerned with the aim of overcoming duḥkha. And I'm going to be using this Sanskrit word duḥkha, which is hard to translate into English, but it's often translated as suffering, pain, disease, sorrow, unsatisfactoriness. So whatever English word we apply to it, it's not adequate. So I'm going to be using duḥkha today. And the third point is the Buddha's emphasis on the importance of one's personal or individual understanding over being excessively reliant on tradition or institution. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these. So again, the first point was the Buddha was a human being, not a god. And this is really important in kind of appreciating the uniqueness of Buddhism among the 3 world religions or any main religions. And so the Buddha should not be compared with, Yahweh in Judaism, God in Christianity, or Allah, because again, Buddha was a human being, and he would be best compared with, Jesus, who was born and he passed away, and same with Muhammad, and who came later in the 6th century. And so, as you all know, the Buddha was born in the northeastern part of the Indian subcontinent almost 2,600 years ago. And he was born as a human being, and then he died as a human being. And of course, he gets idealized later as almost like a God figure, but originally that was not the case. And that's important to remember. That so in some sense, we as an ordinary human being, we can identify him because he had the same kind of concerns that we all have. So Buddha, by becoming enlightened or awakened, he realized truth. We can call it with Dharma. Dharma also means teaching, as you know, but also it points to true reality, the realm of enlightenment. So I will be using the word Dharma in that way. So when Buddha was enlightened, so Buddha did not create Dharma or truth or reality. And I think that he discovered or awakened to it. So the truth is already out there, and he discovered it or awakened to it. And here you have from illustrations from my book, to illustrate the fact that he was born. Here is a baby Buddha or baby Gautama. And then here on the right, when he passed away at the age of 80. So, and then he obviously lived longer than Jesus or Muhammad, and 80 years old. It's actually back then. It's a quite long time. So, as a human being, he had names, and some of you are already aware, but for some of the beginners, his first name, we can say first name was Siddhartha, which Artha means a purpose or goal, and Siddha means one who attained his goal or his purpose. Gautama or Gautama is Sanskrit and Gautama is Pali. So we often know more as Gautama Buddha, but Gautama was his family name, and which means highest cow. Or someone say, holy cow. Is that right? Well, go means cow, and it's a very sacred animal, and so that's his name. Shakyamuni means clan. He belonged to the Shaka clan, and Muni means sage. So later, after he was enlightened, became a Buddha, he was known as the sage of the Shaka clan. Now, the word Buddha literally means awakened person, the awakened one. And he became awakened at the age of 35. So the legend has it, okay? And later, Buddhists came to think that everyone who became awakened or enlightened are Buddhas, especially Mahayana Buddhism. So we all in Mahayana Buddhism seek to, ultimate goal is to become Buddha, just like Shakyamuni. Now, when we say Shakyamuni Buddha, because there's so many Buddhas, and when we say Shakyamuni, it makes it clear that we're talking about the historical Buddha who was born in the Indian subcontinent. Now, later in Mahayana Buddhism, which begins, basically at the beginning of the Common Era, the many other Buddhas which seem to look and appear like God or divine being appear. And these are personification or anthropomorphic representation of that Dharma, the ultimate truth. And these personified or transcendent Buddhas are known often there are many of them, and the one that many of us are aware of is Amitabha or Amida Buddha, which is the main Buddha of the Pure Land tradition. But there's also Medicine Buddha and also the Great Sun Buddha, Vaishajaguru or Mahavairochana. So these are so-called transcendent, divine-like Buddhas, but they're different from Shakyamuni. And many people who are new to Buddhism, especially when they go to Pure Land tradition temples, they find Amida Buddha at the center, and they say, oh, he's not really Shakyamuni. And then we have to explain. So here, Amida Buddha is a personification or anthropomorphic representation of ultimate truth. The second point is that Buddha was most concerned with overcoming dukkha, or suffering. Okay, so that this point needs to be emphasized. And so this parable of the poison arrow, this is in the latter part of the book, in the Jewels book, but there is Buddha says that we are all like someone who is shot by an arrow. And so what we have to do is to pull out the arrow. But don't ask, like this parable, this man says, well, before you pull it out, I want to know all these questions. Who shot me? What is the arrow made out of? What is the bow made out of? So the Buddha says, rather than asking these intellectual or metaphysical questions, such as, one that just made, or more realistically, how big is the universe? How long has the universe or the cosmos existed? Rather than asking these questions, what is important is to recognize that you are shot by an arrow, which means that we all experience, we are subject to dukkha. So we need to do something about it. And of course, there are people who don't feel that way. And well, for them, maybe it's not an urgent matter. But for those of us who feel that to a greater extent, Buddha says there is a way to overcome it. And so I'm going to go quickly with some of the examples of how he was sensitive to dukkha. And this scene comes from his, adolescence, when he was out in the garden. He saw, a worm, and a little bird came and ate the worm. And as it tried to fly away, a larger bird came and grabbed the little bird and took it away. And when the Buddha saw that, he was very saddened to see that creatures have to kill each other. And he was obviously more sensitive than most people. And so this sensitivity to dukkha began early in life. And this one is well-known story from the legend, the life of the Buddha, the 4 excursions away through the excursion from the 4 palace gates. So he saw, in this case, when he first went out at the age of 29 or so, or somewhere about that, he had never seen dukkha, because his father had, provided, because father was afraid that he would become a religious person, not become the next king. So he wanted to protect him and just only showed him happiness. But one day he got out and he began to see old person, sick person, a dead person, and he was, just so in shock, because he had not encountered dukkha like that. And then he was told that he too is subject to that. And then the last gate that he went out, he saw a wandering monk, and he saw that this monk had an air of serenity and inner glow, and he aspired to become like him. So, this part is pretty well known. So he leaves his castle, abandons his position as the future king, and begins to leaves his family, and then goes out into the forest. And here he is, the famous, leaving the palace. And then he begins to engage in, ascetic practices. And the first 6 years or so, he engaged in rigorous ascetic practices. And then what is known as the middle path is when he finally abandons the ascetic practices, which is he realized that is too extreme, and so finds a kind of a practice that is more in the middle, and sits under the Bodhi tree and attains what we call the awakening. And, much can be said about what this awakening was, but nirvana is one way of talking about it, and it's a state where one's flame of greed, hatred, and ignorance has been blown out. Nirvana means blown out. The three poisons have been blown out. And so he found a way to fully understand the nature of the dukkha, the cause of the dukkha, and the way to overcome dukkha. And this is found in the main teaching of the Four Noble Truths. So he taught his discovery to the five monks that he used to train with. And then after that begins the turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And for the next 45 years, he spends his time teaching. And he never traveled in the area of a couple hundred miles and not beyond that in the northeastern part of the subcontinent. So some people say that because Buddhism talks so much about suffering that it's kind of pessimistic. So much talk about dukkha. But what is important to keep in mind is that it doesn't end in dukkha. It begins with the realization of dukkha and the practice to overcome it, but it ends in its negation, and that is important. So there may be lots of talk about dukkha, but like the lotus flower here, it grows out of the mud to bear this beautiful flower. So, I personally don't think that I think Buddhism is realistic. We don't, avoid what is real, face up to it, and then ultimately come out of it. And the next point is one that doesn't need too much explanation, is that Buddha's teaching emphasizes the importance of one's personal and individual understanding over excessive reliance on the tradition or institution. So that is one of the qualities that people in North America and in the West appreciate about Buddhism as it is presented today. And and one example of that is, in his last sermon, he makes this famous phrase. He utters this phrase: "Make yourself the light, rely upon."
You're muted.
I'm muted. Okay, I hope you saw this. So make yourself the light, rely upon yourself. And the emphasis on the self. And do not depend upon anyone else. And make my teachings your light. So, it's not that everything is up to you. There is the Dharma. There is the Dharma that you consider as a light. But it's not 100% the tradition or the teachings. But what is important is how you appreciate and understand the teaching. And this is the famous sutra, the Kalama Sutta. And this one, I'll kind of read it quickly because this is one of the passages that many people in the West appreciate about Buddhism. So here the Buddha is talking to the group of people called Kalamas. Come, Kalamas, do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in a scripture, nor upon surmise, axiom, specious reasoning, bias towards a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another seeming ability, or upon the consideration the monk is our teacher. So he's saying, don't depend so much just on the tradition. There's tradition here, and there's another one on scripture. That's kind of radical. And then even your teacher. So, here, just because the monk is your teacher, that doesn't mean, you abandon your personal appreciation. So then he concludes by saying, Kalamas, when you yourself know, so this is important, you yourself know, these things are good, these things are not blamable, these things are praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness, then enter on and abide in them. So you yourself know. That is the key. So make yourself the light. And so again, Buddha allowed a greater level of individual and personal understanding and appreciation of his teachings. And so again, I want to emphasize the 3 points about his life. And the first one was, again, the Buddha was a human being, and not a god or a divine being. And that really kind of determines the nature of Buddhism. And second, he was most concerned with the aim of overcoming duḥkha. So for us, I think if we are to become a serious seeker, we have to also acknowledge the fact that I too am shot by the arrow, that there is an arrow stuck in me. And that may take, various forms. Like myself, as I probably shared, is that when I was younger, that I was struck by the, impermanence of life and the eventual death. And that, as a teenager, it was a kind of a shock. And I asked myself, why is all this about if we all end up dying? But of course, there is kind of a youthful naivete there, but it was a concern, and it continued to be one for, much of my adult life. But fortunately, I feel that I have come to a greater appreciation and acceptance of my personal death. Of course, I'm a bombu or foolish being. I'm not completely 100% above that, but I know that when the time comes, I will be in a much better position spiritually and mentally than when I was in my teens or even 30s. And the last point is the emphasis on the importance of one's personal understanding over excessive reliance on the traditional institution. So I emphasize the excessive reliance. Some traditions put so much emphasis on the tradition, including the teacher. Certain schools of Buddhism really emphasizes putting too much great emphasis on the guru. And I think that is going too far to the extreme. And of course, you go too extreme, and what you get is a cult. One of the characteristics of a cult is that you don't question the tradition, you don't question the teacher, but that is not the case with the Buddhism, especially the teachings of the Buddha. Okay, so this concludes my short summary of the chapter. So we have a few minutes for comments and questions. Please. Do we have anything in the chat?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So you said that Shakyamuni Buddha, he performed those meditative and ascetic practices and then eventually abandoned them, right?
Yeah. Well, he abandoned the ascetic, very harsh, rigorous, where he only ate 1 grain of rice or, that kind of ascetic practice. Then he went back to a path that is more middle, in the middle.
But aren't there some Buddhist traditions that still follow the ascetic practices?
Okay, so the question is, there are different levels of what we consider ascetic practices. But with Shakyamuni, he went really to the extreme where he only had 1 grain of rice, or and sat in the hot sun. So that kind of extreme practice is no longer being practiced or is not considered Buddhism. But as you say, yes, there are what we ordinary people consider really severe. Yes, there are those, and so that's a fact. But we have tradition. That's why we have traditions in Buddhism, which is more for lay people, and that is something to keep in mind. And Shin practice or Pure Land practice is much more for lay persons. And okay, so is that all right? Okay, Denise.
Okay, now when I was reading that chapter, the Buddha went from having almost like not enough faith in the greater community that they could understand the teachings to all of a sudden he spread his Dharma or the Dharma. Now, I understand it was his disciples that kind of talked him into that. Is that correct?
Well, there is stories about how he was hesitant initially to share what he discovered because it was too difficult, and he went against the grain of ordinary life, and so, but it was someone who came and said, this is very important, so please, so he was encouraged. And I've always felt that's kind of strange for an enlightened being to, say, well, kind of hesitate. But the point is that he felt that what he had discovered could not be fully understood by ordinary people. So, but, once he began to teach and he taught at different levels to the monks and nuns, those who abandoned regular life, and then he also taught for ordinary people. So he has a kind of gradation in what he was teaching. Okay, good. Maybe one question. So isn't it questionable whether Jesus referred to the Christian Bible actually existed as a historical human being? Well, okay. Well, this point, whether he was really historical, I mean, Jesus was actually a historical person. We may not know the details, but he definitely, must have lived as a human being. I mean, that I don't think people will question that. And people may question what kind of a human being. Obviously, he was a human being, but he was also God. That's where theology kicks in. But in reality, he was a human being. And he didn't live as long as Shakyamuni, maybe in the mid-30s. But okay, so someone, I'm not registered as a participant. May I please receive the link each time for the surveys? Oh, okay. I understand.
I think I'm figuring it out. Thanks.
Yes, okay. All right. I think the time is here, so I will conclude my session. Okay, so yeah, please read that, have a strong understanding of who Shakyamuni Buddha was, and because that is at the core of Buddhism as it develops afterwards. Okay, so the today's lay guest speaker is Mr. Tatsuaki Kono from Japan, and I think he may be the only Japanese in this session. So I know that for someone who's English is not a native language. It's a challenge, but he has been good enough to say yes, and so he will introduce himself a little bit as usual, and then take an aspect or dimension of the topic and talk about it. So, Mr. Kono, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Tanaka. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tatsuaki, but please call me Tatsu. I live in Tokyo. First of all, I would like to thank Reverend Dr. Tanaka for giving me the opportunity to become familiar with Buddhism and meet people who are interested in Buddhism. Started studying Buddhism with Dr. Tanaka 7 years ago. At first, my wife and I attended his class at BDK Japan.
Okay. Mr. Kono,
Later, I encouraged one of my sons to
excuse
take
me,
the
can
same
you, Mr. Kono, can you speak up a little louder? I think it's not, some people are saying it's not, you're not as loud.
Oh, okay. Yes, just a moment, please. Okay, is it okay now?
Yeah, but just try to speak louder too, okay?
Right, yes, I will.
Okay.
I decided to take the Buddhism course because I had started working as a tour guide interpreter around that time, and I thought I would need some knowledge about Buddhism to guide foreign visitors to Japan. And since then, I have taken various courses by Dr. Tanaka, as well as other courses, and read many books related to Buddhism. When I received an email from Dr. Tanaka about this class, I was wondering if most of the participants were young. It turns out that most of the participants are young at heart. Today,
You mean young at heart? Yeah, yeah, they're all young at heart. Yes.
Today, I would like to talk about the birth verse of the Buddha. Verse is Gatha, and it's a poetic verse. According to the legend, the Buddha proclaimed soon after he was born and took 7 steps. In heavens above and on earth, I alone am the Word Honored One. And this is my last birth. There will be no further rebirth. Or I will free all people who are suffering in the 3 realms of existence. The 3 realms in this case are the desire realm, the formal realm, and the formless realm. These 3 realms constitute samsara, which is the cycle of birth and death, or reincarnation.
Okay, Mr. Kono,
Yes.
I thought you were going to share PowerPoint.
Yes, a little later, yes.
Oh, okay, a little later, okay.
In reality, I think the Buddha cried like any other baby at birth and did not utter the birth verse. However, let's assume that he actually took 7 steps and proclaimed the birth verse. The part I alone am the Word Honored One is sometimes misunderstood, so that he is thought to be very arrogant. I have some concerns about how this verse is being used in Japan. I would now like to comment on this point.
Okay.
But before making...
just to make clear that for the audience, you can begin share.
Right.
Mr. Kono is going to take up this passage that he is said to have uttered when he was born. He took 7 steps and said, heavens above, heavens below, I am the only honored one. And so, as he said, it sounds very arrogant, and that's caused a lot of misunderstanding. And so he will take that up. He will be focusing on this very topic.
Thank you very much. But before making some comments on this, for those who have never been to Japan, let me introduce the city of Hiroshima, the name of which I trust is very famous because of atomic bomb during the World War II. I myself lived in Hiroshima for 5 years. One thing that surprised me when I went to Hiroshima about 40 years ago was that there was still is a hospital called atomic bomb survivors hospital. The reason why I decided to talk about Hiroshima is because there was once a debate in Hiroshima about the meaning of the birth verse. Let me share the PowerPoint.
Okay. Mr. Kono,
Yes.
some people are still saying that they would like for you to speak louder, and other people, those of you listening, please put increase your volume on your computer. That may help, but so okay.
I've increased my volume too.
Yeah, and speak louder. Yeah.
Yes, I will. Yeah, thank you. Okay. This is Japan. Japan is a bit smaller than the state of California and is almost the same size as the state of Montana or Germany. The percentage of forest area in Japan is about 66% compared to 30% average in the rest of the world. In other words, the habitable land is limited in Japan like this. This is where Hiroshima is located. The population of Hiroshima city is about 1.2 million. Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park in Hiroshima City was established to commemorate the victims of the atomic bombing and to convey the importance of peace to the world. In the park, there is the Atomic Bomb Dome, which has been designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, as well as the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. President Obama visited the Peace Memorial Park in Hiroshima in 2016 as the first sitting US president to visit the atomic bombed city. In his address, he said, 71 years ago, on a bright, cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world was changed. A flash of light and a wall of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the means to destroy itself. After his address, President Obama talked to Mr. Tsuboi, a representative of the Japanese organization Nihon Hidankyo, the organization of atomic bomb survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which received this year's Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. This is a sculpture of the birth of Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni is born from the right side of Queen Maya in the center, and Indra on the left receives him. Shakyamuni has a halo around his head and hands together in prayer. It is said that the Buddha took 7 steps immediately after his birth, and at each step, a lotus flower appeared on the ground. Then he stopped and said, "In heavens above and on earth, I alone am the world-honored one. This is my last birth. There will be no further rebirth." Another version is, "In heavens above and on earth, I alone am the world-honored one. I will free all people who are suffering in the 3 realms of existence." As to why he took 7 steps, some interpretations say that it represents that the world that he would overcome the 6 months of suffering and take the extra step into the awakened life. At 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, an atomic bomb was dropped, killing about 140,000 by the end of the year 1945. The effects of the bomb were felt for years afterwards. Many people died of diseases related to radiation exposure. On every August 6th since 1947, except 1951, when the Korean War broke out, the Peace Memorial ceremony is held at the Peace Memorial Park in Hiroshima to console the souls of the dead and to pray for the peace of the world. The peace declaration performed by the mayor of Hiroshima in the ceremony is sent to all the countries, and he calls for the abolition of nuclear weapons. In the peace declaration for the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Ceremony in 2004, the mayor of Hiroshima prepared a text criticizing the countries that possess nuclear weapons for being egocentric by using the expression, "I alone am the world honored one." The Jodo Shinshu Honganji Buddhist denomination then objected that this usage was incorrect. The city of Hiroshima countered that this usage of the Buddha's birth verse was also written in a dictionary. However, in the end, the city of Hiroshima changed the birth verse to a non-Buddhist and ordinary word, egocentric. The mayor later stated that the reason for the change was that the birth verse has a secular meaning as well as a religious one. He said that he made the change because he thought that the peace declaration should reflect the voices of as many citizens as possible. As the mayor of Hiroshima pointed out, it may be true that while ordinary Japanese people view the birth verse as egocentric, those in the Buddhist world believe it has religious significance. I think "I alone am the world honored one" became a common phrase in Japan, and people often use this phrase in a different meaning without the clear awareness that it is the birth verse of the Buddha. I agree that the expression "I alone am the world honored one" is a bit difficult to understand. Some Buddhist denominations say "I alone am the world honored one" originally meant that all human life is precious. In other words, "I alone am the world honored one" is meant to teach that humans are not precious because of certain conditions, abilities, academic background, wealth, status, health, and so on, but that human life is precious and irreplaceable in itself. They also say that there is a noble mission that only we, humans, can fulfill. This understanding sounds great, and I fully agree to what they say in relation to the birth verse, but it may be difficult to read this much meaning into the words of the birth verse. It is likely that the birth verse of the Buddha is based on an encounter that he had in his life. It had to do with how the Buddha replied to Ajivika Upaka when the Buddha was asked who his master might be. Upaka was the first person the Buddha met after he became enlightened. The Buddha replied, "I have no master, and no one can be compared with me. In the world of livers, there is no one equal to me. I am an arhat to the world. I'm the one fully awakened." In conclusion, it is possible to understand the birth verse "I alone am the world honored one" to mean that Shakyamuni is declaring, "I will attain enlightenment as a Buddha and will lead those who are suffering and troubled to true happiness." How the Buddha leads us to true happiness seems to be shown in his final words: "Make yourself the light. Rely upon yourself. Do not depend on anyone else. Make my teachings your light." For your information, there were some American soldiers who became victims of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. This is an origami crane. The origami crane is a symbol of peace, and people from all over Japan and the world offer origami cranes to the Children's Peace Monument in Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. The number of cranes offered each year is about 10 million. weighing about 10 tons. Thank you for kind attention. Reverend Dr. Tanaka, thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Buddha in today's session.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kono,
Thank
for
you.
highlighting that well-known phrase. And as he reported, it caused a commotion or controversy when he used that passage to argue that nations which have nuclear weapons are egocentric. And so that, I alone am the honored one, as he was saying, is often used in Japan in the ordinary sense when expressing, egocentricity, or when one is, boasting. Or so anyway. So, but the the Buddhist community objected because it has a deeper meaning, and as Mr. Kono explained, the Buddhist, from the Buddhist perspective, it is expressing that we all of us are precious and are important in a real true sense. Anyway, I hope, obviously, I don't think that, I don't know about yourselves, but if you can accept the fact that, when he was born, he uttered those words. I mean, it's a legend. And so it's trying, the later Buddhists who, produced this legend, was trying to get across the notion that all human life or life is precious. And so, but I also think that there was an attempt to really make the Buddha more special. I mean, that's always true with the followers, that you want to make your master more special than others. So there is that element as well. But anyway, okay, let's open it up to question and comments if you. All right. So please, we have quite a bit of time.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you please elaborate a little bit more on how it's being used in the non-religious sense in Japan? I'm not clear on that. Is it being attributed to world leaders or to countries?
Oh.
And is it only for nuclear weapons, or is it all weapons of killing and mass destruction?
Mr. Kono, you want to answer that? How is it used ordinarily, not religiously?
Well, it doesn't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. Well, it may be a little bit difficult to explain in English, because when it is said in Japanese, it sounds more egocentric in itself.
So, yeah, for me to add to what Mr. Kono just said, the Japanese is a yui ga dokson, and that is often connected with, someone saying, I am the greatest, and so it's not, but the mayor of Hiroshima in this case used it to talk about, nations that have nuclear weapons, and he felt that they were being, ego-centered. They're only thinking about themselves. But ordinarily, it's used to point to people or those who are self-centered, and so it's misunderstood. So it goes contrary to what the Buddhists understand. That I wonder, is that clear, Anita?
I'm not sure, because if it's in Japanese, you can't translate it literally into the English. It wouldn't make sense, but it's understood that way.
Yeah, but even in English, it says, I alone am the honored one. See that? I mean,
But
that's what it says in
think of
English.
that normally.
What was that?
I don't think that an individual would just stand up and say that. Well, some people might.
Some some people might, yeah, that's true. But the words themselves are, self-centered. I mean, but yeah, I guess in English, I mean, it's not well known. So, but it is in Japanese that it's come to be understood to point to utterances that are
Okay.
egocentered. Yeah.
But
Okay.
then to the 7 steps that he took, the legend says, like to elaborate and put some value from the time of birth rather than from the time of his teachings, if we want to go back that far.
Yeah.
What was the significance of the 7 steps?
Well, do you want to answer, or Mr. Kono, what's the significant 7 steps?
Well, one of the examples I mentioned is to overcome the 6 realms of suffering, but there are some other understandings. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
hard.
that's usually the case. The 6 realms, which is a realm of, birth and death, or enlightenment, realm of transmigration. So the 7th is transcending the 6 realms, which means, becoming awakened, enlightened, because 6 realms is not where you want to be. So anyway, I remember, there was that famous book, a movie, about life of the Buddha, and I took my one of my kids, and they were about like 6 or 7, and he brought his non-Buddhist friends, and we went to a movie, and I still remember when they saw that scene where the lotus flowers pop up, and they all turned to me asking, is that true? So I had a hard time trying to explain that, but anyway, that is, even little kids, wonder, does that really happen? Does it take 7 steps? And so it's all, symbolic. I mean, I think that, so that point is very important, 7 steps. 7 is kind of transcending the 6 realms, but even in Western notion, I understand that there is a sense of more dynamic. 7 is like we say lucky 7, right? So there's kind of a history to that. The word 7, the number 7, it's more forward, transcending, going, dynamic, and it has that dimension to it. Okay, good question. How about if I'm gonna ask point. How about David? David Tan, since you're
Yes, Tatsu-san. So it sounds like that in describing what happened at the memorial service and the mayor bringing up this phrase from the Buddha, which again is known to sound very arrogant, but it also sounds like that the people, either secular people or religious people, or secular people who understand the religious sense, understand the difference between the two. That he's pointing out the disparity between the two interpretations of I alone am that's will save the world, and by pointing that out, it almost sounds like he's pointing out that even though your intention is you are going to try to make things better, the way you're going about doing it, nuclear weapons only being one of these, is not the way to go about it. We need to go back to how the Buddha use the term on how to save mankind, not by this way through the ego, but through this way through his teachings.
Well,
Okay.
いいですね。
I don't think I understand quite clearly your question.
Yeah. Okay. I think, David is pointing out that, there's a kind of secular wrong understanding, but there is the Buddhist religious understanding. And there definitely is a conflict between the two. And I think, Mr. Kono, you pointed out the secular understanding and the true Buddhist understanding, which is to point to the preciousness of each living being, and that is what was meant. So yeah, I think it can lead to misunderstanding, but in this case, it's been corrected. So
if I may, it might have been a little bit confusing because I used the what mayor of Hiroshima tried to use the expression "I alone am the world honored one" to mean the countries who possess nuclear weapons egocentric, but the word egocentric, the word egocentric doesn't have a not direct relationship with nuclear weapons. What's confusing is that in many dictionaries, the meaning as to the meaning of "I alone am the world honored one" to mean egocentric in Japan. So that's why they used this expression "I alone am the world honored one" to mean those countries who possess nuclear weapons egocentric. So the word "I alone am the world honored one" doesn't have any relationship with nuclear weapons.
yeah.
They just used picked up this expression to mean egocentric.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it obviously, that phrase in the ordinary sense points to an egocentric attitude, and but in this case, the mayor of Hiroshima used it to refer to countries that have nuclear weapons. Yeah. So did you yourself, before you studied Buddhism, Mr. Kono, did you think the same way that that phrase was egocentric? Or you didn't know about it?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. You sound like a politician. But had you heard that phrase, Yuiga Dokson?
Yes, well, especially when it is used by young people, they use.
Oh,
Yes, there are some young people who like to use this expression because it sounds nice in Japanese. But
I didn't know that the young people like to use that.
yeah.
Kind of expresses a rebellion. I see. Okay, that's interesting how Buddhist phrases can be taken up by, in a secular sense by young people like that. Yeah. Well, hopefully maybe they learn the deeper meaning of that. And so, okay. All right. I think let's thank Mr. Kono. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. I know, to make the presentation in English is quite challenging for anyone whose language is the native language is not English. So okay, so let's go to Reverend Hamasaki, who is a junior minister at Sacramento Buddhist Temple, and so Reverend Hamasaki, are you here? Can you
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, now we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So as usual, he can introduce himself a little bit and then share his thoughts on this topic. Okay, please.
Sure. Okay. Everyone is the volume okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
volume is good.
Okay. All right, good. So my name is Reverend Matt Hamasaki. I am one of the resident ministers at the Sacramento Buddhist Church. I guess I'll talk a bit about myself as sort of how much
Uh,
time am I supposed to take up, Tanaka Sensei?
For talking about yourself, 3 minutes or, like 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes.
Oh, no, for like the whole thing.
The whole thing, you have half an hour, but we'd like to have you end in about, 20 minutes or so,
Okay.
so leave some time for
Okay. All right.
Q&A.
Okay. So, originally my plan was, as like being the minister speaker to give some kind of doctrinal, Jodo Shinshu explanation of a certain concept, but Tanaka Sensei had advised me that it'd be better to maybe relate to a personal side of, my journey throughout Buddhism. So the story is kind of what led me essentially to become a minister. And so I grew up going to the temple. So I'm a fourth generation Japanese American. So my great grandparents came to America from Japan, and then with them they were Jodo Shinshu. My grandparents were Jodo Shinshu. My dad was Jodo Shinshu. So I grew up going to the temple. I went to the Berkeley Buddhist Temple, where coincidentally I also met Tanaka Sensei and his kids. I grew up going to Dharma school with them, so there's kind of a connection there. But recently in my life, I realized through like self, introspection or reflection that I'm self-diagnosed autistic and I have ADHD. So I forget what it was that sparked this during, I think, the like pandemic when all of us had too much time. So I was watching videos and stuff, and I was hearing about like these, I don't know, memes or something like, oh yeah, I've got this. And I was like, oh, hey, I'm kind of like that too. So I looked into it, kind of deep dive, which, kind of classic, like hyper focus ADHD, and realized that, oh, that actually makes my entire life like make sense, where a lot of things started to fall into place. For instance, it was always tricky for me to make like small talk with people. I didn't really understand it. And like having conversations in a normal sense, I never knew what was like off limits to talk to somebody, what was appropriate. I had to sort of learn that on my own. So I watched a lot of like late night TV and watching the guests interact with like the host. And that's how I learned how to talk to people essentially. And then of course, being a minister, I get a lot of practice because I have to talk to people all the time. But this sort of experience of realizing this and looking back on my life, it made it a little bit more clear as to the sort of progression of this turning of a heart within my own experience. So this is a term which is used within Jodo Shinshu, and I bring it up because it's important within the Buddha's life that there is something that happens to him where he decides that he wants to leave the bounds of the palace to go out and then to follow this path. So similarly, all of us, in my opinion, have some sort of change in our life, something that happens where it pushes us further within our spiritual path, right? A lot of us are born into some religions and we go and, we have a good or bad experience or whatever, but oftentimes something does happen that's dramatic that ends up pushing us in a certain way. It's not so easy as like picking out a single moment in your life. It was told to me as like from one of my teachers that it's kind of like getting drunk. If everyone's gotten drunk before, you don't know like the exact second you get drunk, right? You're drinking and then you keep drinking, and then at certain point you're drunk, but you couldn't go back and say like, oh, it was like at whatever 8:35 or something that it happened. So in that sense, all of us within our spiritual lives, there is something that happens where we start to make this shift in really pursuing the path. And at some point in our life, it happens, but it's always unclear, exactly maybe when. I know some people have maybe a very dramatic life and it does happen, but not for me. Anyway, so growing up at the Berkeley Buddhist Temple, I was kind of a quirky kid, I guess you could say. One of my basketball coaches said it was very challenging to coach me. And I did give, a lot of grief to my Sunday school teachers, but they were very patient with me. And not only were they very patient with me, but also my peers. So my mom, who I'm pretty sure is not on the Zoom call, but my mom was very, she still is, but can't do it so much anymore. She was very overprotective. So I wasn't really allowed to like hang out with friends at school, outside of school and stuff. And for whatever reason, she trusted the people at the Buddhist temple. So that's where I really got close to the people there. And it still is, but it's a smaller temple. And so because of that, we got very close to the people, in my grade and my age. It was sort of this like second family for me. And, also all of the, older members, all the, bachans and stuff, they would always look after all of the kids, make sure that they weren't going too crazy. So everyone had that sort of closeness that, if you're getting out of line, someone could say something to you. But also, we also cared very much for each other. We, see each other every Sunday. So it was this nice sort of gathering. Growing up, I eventually went into high school, and then in high school, my priorities changed, and I was always thinking about how I could hang out with my friends and, meet like cute girls and stuff. And so we had this junior YBA, which is the Junior Young Buddhist Association. And if you are unfamiliar with this, it's a group of high school age kids or teenagers, and each temple has an organization, and they'll meet up at different conferences that are put on by certain districts or temples or something. And it's a lot of fun because you get to meet new people, you get to hang out with your friends. You have to go to, the Buddhist like workshops. You have service in the morning. So there's like that stuff, which, when as a teenager, I was like, I guess you have to, because you have to go through the whole day so that you can go to the dance right at the end at night. And that's where all the cute girls were. So I had to do that. But it was a lot of fun for me to do all of that because, one, I was unable to really do much else other than that kind of like fun stuff, on top of being with these people that were really accepting of me. And so people were always accepting of me no matter, kind of where I go. And so I feel like I got really lucky in that sense. But going to all these different conferences and having to go all these workshops, I ended up attending one where there was a panel of ministers. And so it was a question and answer panel. And if my memory serves me correctly, it was a conference where you could pick which workshop you could go to. And so this one, for whatever reason, ended up being kind of an unpopular one, but I ended up going. And so I could get my questions answered because I was like the only person there. So I asked them why they became ministers. And one of them fielded the question, and he was talking about how he had a really good job. I believe he was working as a journalist, had a very nice apartment, and for whatever reason, I remember that every time he would get a raise, he would go out and buy like a nice watch. So that was his thing. He would get a raise and get a watch. But in the same year, he lost his mother and his sister. And so it brought him to a really bad place. And the only thing that pulled him out of it was Buddhism. And so this sort of kind of clicked in my head of like, oh, I could, maybe be a minister. I wanted to go into some kind of field where I could help people. And so originally I thought I wanted to be like a dentist because I couldn't be a doctor. So my mom, also being kind of this Asian tiger mom, she's like, you can be a doctor or a lawyer. I was like, well, I can't be a doctor because if someone came in and they had like a full body rash, I'd be like, yeah, no, stay like far, far away. But if it was localized to maybe like the area of like a mouth, like I think that size, I would be okay. So that's kind of the path I was thinking I would be on. But after hearing that, I was like, okay, well, Buddhism is something that can help people. And then also it was something that I felt like I could give back to this community that I had gotten, so much from. So those two things kind of pushed me in that direction. I was also kind of like hopelessly ignorant about what the job of being a minister entailed, because as a kid, you go to church on Sunday and you see the minister, and that's the only time you see them. So kind of like the garbage man, where it's like, yeah, the garbage man comes on Monday at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that's the only time you see him. So it's like, okay, well, that's the only time they work, right? So I got to work one day a week, and then I get a car and a house. That sounds like a great gig. But upon realizing, like, oh no, it's like there's way more work in being a minister. Anyway, so I wanted to pursue that path. At the time, I was thinking like, oh, I can give back to this community. It's something that I could help. And it actually wasn't until much later, upon reflecting on it, that the whole reason why I had been drawn into the Buddhist community and why I had felt so accepted and loved was because of these incredible people that were at the temple. They were so patient and accepting and very caring of who I was as a person, regardless of how maybe annoying or quirky I could have been. They still really saw me as one of them, and it didn't matter. I was always going to be part of that family. So having that acceptance within my life really helped me to feel that connection to Buddhism, and ultimately that led me down this path of being a Buddhist minister. So with all of that experience, there was this sort of, eventually this turning of our heart that ends up pushing me in that direction. And so to put it in those sort of like, Jodo Shinshu terms, it's important for us to really reflect upon ourselves when thinking about both, our life in the past, but in the future. So oftentimes when we get asked as ministers, oh, Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, like, what's your practice or something, as every kind of Buddhist sect has some kind of practice. And of course, doctrinally, it is saying the Nembutsu, it is relying on the primal vow, the 18th vow. But to put it in kind of more maybe layman's terms, it's important for us to really reflect on ourselves and how we interacted with other people, how we're going to interact with people in the future, our actions, and how they are perhaps harmful or beneficial to us, and harmful or beneficial to the people around us. And it's really when we have this kind of switch flick off inside our minds that we recognize the amount of compassion that's always surrounding us, wisdom as well, from all of these people who have always constantly been there for us, that it allows us to really have that to jump in with both feet going in that direction. So oftentimes we get asked about the most important thing in Jodo Shinshu, which is Shinjin. And so that can be broken down maybe to the smallest parts of two aspects of deep mind, which are kind of explained here as inwardly realizing, the limited being that you are, and then also recognizing the vast compassion of Amida Buddha. So with these two aspects, we have this sort of realization, we have this change. And so again, going back kind of hopefully full circle to the life of the Buddha also had this realization, which, prior to enlightenment, pushed him down the path. So there was something, this kind of switch that flicked on for the Buddha before, of course, he was the Buddha. And he ended up doing it. So for each of us, which probably everyone here doesn't need to be, I don't know, necessarily looking for it in the future, because I think by being here, there's pretty good evidence that you've already kind of gone through that. But it is nice to look within yourself and your past and see kind of what happened, what motivated you perhaps, and it will continue to motivate you in the future, and also maybe be sort of an example for the people around you. So the fourth gate for the Buddha was the ascetic that was wandering. And so this is sort of how Buddhism ends up being spread, is that we're not, banging on doors, like telling people that they, have you heard the good word? But rather by leading by example, and the life that you live, it sort of will draw people in if you are living in a way that it seems like you are actually happy. If you are actually happy, then people will see it and it will draw them to you. And so that's, as I understand it, sort of how Buddhism has been spread, as continues to be spread. And it's not that we can't do any, marketing or anything. I'm always kind of hounding our board to do more marketing. But ultimately, what is going to sell people or get people to really understand and try to follow Buddhism is seeing how, people who really believe it, who understand it, who truly are living that Nemutsu path, the kind of life that they're living, it makes them want to do it too. So I hope with a little bit of illustration from, my own personal life, my own explanation, it helps to maybe, guide someone else, or can pull some kind of inspiration from it in that same way. And then all of us, within our own lives, also sort of trying to exude or radiate that same kind of expression of gratitude to the Buddhist teaching.
Okay, thank you. One question is, for you, what dimension or aspect of Buddha's life inspires you the most? Would you say what the life, the theme is the life of the Buddha, and in listening to you, you emphasize the supportive environment of the Sangha, and that really was a motivation. You want to kind of give back, and also you wanted to help people. I wonder, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about yourself. Was there any like dukkha that motivated you to Dharma that, that you were trying to resolve, or find a resolution to?
Yeah, I mean the dukkha of feeling very alone and feeling misunderstood. It was very difficult, and so that's why it was so important to have the Sangha that kind of remedied both that feeling of loneliness and acceptance. So like that was very important. And then I guess as far as the inspiring aspects of the Buddha, I just off the top of my head, perhaps as a minister, the when the Buddha achieves enlightenment, as the legend goes in one of the stories, he's sitting under the tree and he's thinking to himself, there's no way anyone else is going to be able to understand this. I might as well just sit here and enjoy enlightenment, and I'll live like this happy life. But the king of the gods, Brahma, really appeals to Buddha, and he says, no, there's a bunch of people, and they're real close, and if you just give them a little bit and push them over, then they'll be able to attain it too. And so he's like pleading with Buddha to teach others, and Buddha's like, oh, okay, all right, I'll get up. So then he gets up and he begins, teaching other people. And so without that, then like it doesn't spread. So, for myself, it's much less like, oh, this would be, I don't think people are getting it, but it's more so like, I don't know if I want to get out of bed, today. But it's that motivation that, there's someone out there that needs it. And if there's one person at temple, if there's only one person that hears me, there's only one person that understands it, then that's enough. That's a reason, to keep going. And so that's, very, motivating for me.
So how has it been so far? You've been a minister about what, 6-7 years, or?
Yeah, let's see, 2015. So almost 10 years. Yeah.
Oh, almost 10 years. Oh, wow. And has your ideals been met, or goals, or how has it been?
So there's a lot more meetings than I expected to go to. So yeah, being a minister is mostly sitting in meetings that you don't need to be in. But there is a lot of stuff too that I didn't expect, but is also very meaningful. So when I was down in the Central Valley, taking care of Fresno and the temples around there with Rimba Nakagawa, my supervising minister. There was a lot of funerals and memorial services that we had to do, and obviously that's not like a very fun aspect of the job, but it is one of the most meaningful because that's where you can really help people that need it, people that are going through a tough time, especially if they lose somebody unexpectedly or young. And so to be there in that capacity was very important for me. And then, for myself, I always appreciate being able to work with the youth, the younger kids. Maybe it's because you always get honesty with kids, whereas like grown-ups, like you don't know. But with the kids, being able to really help them or influence them, that is like the most, I guess, warming, to my heart to see them, get it or be thankful or even just to, be happy to be like at temple. Then that's really what brings me joy. And so, although it hasn't been perhaps as frequent as I would have liked it, it definitely has happened and continues to, help me stay motivated as well. So, right now we're working with our Metapadma class, which is a Scout Award given to at our temple. They're in 3rd grade. So this is for both Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. We also have an award for temple members that aren't in the scouting program but want to attend it. And it's a 10-week course where we teach them essentially the basics of Buddhism. And so being able to talk to them and hear their thoughts and their reactions, it's always a lot of fun, for myself. And I'd like to think that the kids, get a lot out of it. It's definitely a process learning how to teach like 9-year-olds. It's a lot of repetition, but I mean, that's all of us, right? We don't remember anything unless we hear it over and over again. But understanding, their viewpoint and what they're seeing the world, how they're seeing the world and how they're interacting with it, and then being able to help them, especially when they're struggling, because at least from my understanding, it seems like school is way harder than when I went through school, and so I think they need something, they need some kind of support. So if I can offer that in any way, then I'm very happy to do that.
Okay, well, please, questions, comments. Well, just speak up. You don't have to get our attention. Okay. Oh,
Hamasaki, is your screensaver from the Gardena Temple, or is that
Oh.
Sacramento?
No, this is Sacramento.
That's really a nice setup.
Yeah, I see you. Oh, my chair. Okay. Yeah. If you're ever in town, yeah, please stop by. I'd be happy to show it to you. We also have some better pictures on our website, but yeah, if you're ever in town, we're happy to open it up for everybody.
yeah, Sacramento temple is one of the most vibrant temples, and I think for Sunday school or Dharma school, you still get over 100 people, right? I mean, kids, right? Students, maybe much more, right?
It used to be a lot more, but the pandemic, was difficult, and so getting people to come back is hard. It was connected to our youth sports program, so that really helped, get the kids out as well. But we do have over 100 kids enrolled in Dharma school. So still, yeah, I know there's a lot of temples that would like kill to have those kind of numbers. But yeah, it used to be, I think, like 500 or something ridiculous.
Yeah, well, 500. Okay, one question. Do you have in the chat, do you have any disappointments?
Yeah, Reverend Kobata. Yeah, I have a lot of disappointments.
Yeah.
It's been hard, being a minister and working with the board. And by being disappointed, I don't mean to blame the board, but a lot of people don't understand the job of being a minister. And of course, you wouldn't if you've never been a minister. So that's like totally understandable. But because of that, it's hard working with somebody who is supposedly like, an employer, but they don't know like your job description. And so you kind of have to like explain it to them, but then the only way they understand it is through their own lens of, a 9 to 5 or something. So that's been, something I guess recently, but it's also been hard in the sense that I've only been assigned to very large temples, and essentially not even like temples, but like districts. Because even here we oversee Marysville. I did a funeral there today, and Placer, and then maybe Florence, depending on some immigration things. But anyway, so like that's been tough too, because in my mind, being a minister, you're there every Sunday, you see the same people, you can start programs that you can be available for, but it's really hard when I'm being pulled in so many different directions that I can't focus on any one thing, let alone something that is new or different or something, that I would want to institute. So that's been also very difficult for me, where if there was a little bit more consistency in my availability, if there wasn't so much that we have to take care of, so much going on, then I would be able to maybe institute some programs that would meet other needs that are, because like people talk about like, oh yeah, we should have like an adult Dharma school, something where people who maybe didn't grow up in the temple or wanted a refresher course or just enjoy discussing Buddhism would be able to go when all the kids are going to their Sunday school. So like stuff like that, where like, yeah, I'd love to do that, but I don't know if I'm going to be there on Sunday, so it's kind of hard to plan around that. So
Well, Reverend Hamasaki, please encourage him to join our course. Yeah, I mean, nowadays, with all the with the online courses, there's opportunity. You don't, so anyway, one question in the chat was, does your temple offer Dharma school for adults online? Oh, remote, yeah, remote.
Yeah, so we don't. I know Orange County has something that they do in online. All of our services are online, so you could look through all of that. We do have a lot of content, as I mentioned on our website. We just redid our website, so there's a lot of great stuff on there, on top of links to the YouTube and stuff where we have all of our services. But yeah, we don't have any remote Dharma school as of yet.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Steve.
Reverend Matt, thank you for sharing your story, your narrative. It's really wonderful to hear. You actually represent a unique. You're one of the BCA's younger ministers, and it's really great to see you in the role that you are. But as a young minister, what insights might you give to the temples or the sanghas of helping to identify younger individuals who might, first of all, be interested in pursuing the ministry? That's the first question. And secondly, just identifying other young individuals who might be kind of tapped on their shoulder to see if they would take a bigger role in some of the roles that temples require as you build new leadership in a temple.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It's definitely something that if I had an answer for, I would be doing it. But from my experience, just, and I don't mean to be kind of self-absorbed, I am the honored one, sort of thing. But I've noticed that after, I took that path, a lot of people who I would consider my peers saw it as sort of a viable thing to do. And so I think just, I don't know, not just encouraging, but maybe visibility of like younger ministers, not just myself. I'm not, it was a long time, but I'm not the youngest minister anymore, which is, fantastic. If anything, I feel like I'm one of the veterans. But the visibility there of ministers, I think, is important, to connect people to maybe, young ministers if they do have some kind of interest. And in terms of like the studying side, I was very fortunate that the Berkeley Buddhist Temple was, very proud of me. And, every time I go back, they always like, oh yeah, you're a son of the temple. And so they financially helped me out through grad schools when I was going through IBS. And of course, the minister at the time, Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto, who was also, part of the faculty at IBS, really made the case at the temple, and I doubt he got any pushback, but just like it's a great opportunity for us to help the future, and so they no strings attached, nothing. They helped me out to get through school, and I think that's also important. And he's talked to me too about like how there's a lot of scholarships out there and money that's for people who are pursuing the ministry, but that is definitely something I want everyone to keep on their radar. In terms of getting young people involved, I think we have to really change our mindset of the temple, of how it exists and its purpose, because in the past, and I'm not trying to say we got complacent, but it was very easy to rely on people to become members simply because they were part of the family. So people would have kids, their kids would grow up, their kids would have kids, and then they would be part of the temple. Now that is no longer the case. The temple is no longer the social hub that it used to be, that everyone got married there, that everyone had their parties there, that all these things happen around the temple, that if you were going to go out on the weekend, you would go to the temple. It's very different from that experience. And so young people nowadays, especially young parents, are very busy. They have these crazy schedules. They're doing so much things. And young people, even in their 20s and in the teens, the temple is now competing with everything else that young people can do nowadays. And so instead of just like being like, oh, well, young people are just going to come back to the temple eventually, we now have to make a case or create something or showcase something that they would not be able to have anywhere else, that you could only have at the temple. And so people have to choose like, oh, I should go to Sunday service for XYZ reasons, because of this, because of whatever. And it's going to be different for every family. It's going to be different for every temple. But if there is something that we can offer that makes people want to go, then that's what's going to get them to come. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is if there are,
can you wrap it up because we're running out of time? Yeah.
Sure. Real quick. Yeah. So just for real quick, if there are young people that do want to participate or help out, we just have to trust them, because it's so easy for us to be like, oh, well, we've done that before, or oh, we don't like that, or oh, we've done things for this way for so long. And then the older generations will just, shut them down, shut them out, and they feel terrible about it, even though they want to help. They're trying to give something. So you have to let young people fail. You have to let them try. You have to let them do something. And that's the only way that they will feel included, and that they have this buy-in, and that they'll want to come back. So, just to trust them that they'll be able to pick themselves up if they fall, or that they might succeed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think we kind of focused on the institutional dimension of our Buddhism, but I did want to ask you about your spiritual personal part, but I think we're out of time, and I don't want to go over time. And maybe if you may be able to join our in-depth discussion 2 weeks from now, maybe you can talk a little bit more about it. But anyway, for those who want to pursue this topic, every 2 weeks afterwards, we will hold this in-depth discussion session. So please join us then. So as we close, we want to thank Reverend Hamasaki and Mr. Kono for your sharing. I think people really enjoyed what you had to share. So thank you. Okay, Reverend Anita, can you close?
Absolutely. It was a wonderful program tonight. So this concludes tonight's formal presentations for today's session. We hope you found it instructive and meaningful. The link for the video recording will be sent to you in a couple of days. Please make use of it to deepen your understanding and for responding to the questionnaire. Our informal group discussion, the Nirvana Happy Hour, with our speakers and Dr. Tanaka will begin soon. This will be a great time if you have more questions or comments or you want to have discussions in a more relaxed atmosphere. Everybody is welcome. The Nirvana Happy Hour is strictly optional. You don't have to attend, but it would be fun. For those joining, we're going to take a short 5-minute break before we start. And for everyone else, we look forward to seeing you again at our in-depth discussion and session in about 2 weeks, or at our next Fireside Chat session on December 7 next month. Until then, please stay well and best wishes in your efforts to understand the Dharma, both intellectually and spiritually. 5-minute break.